We're talking with Geoff Snider, one of the best lacrosse players that's ever come out of Canada. And my first question for you is really simple. You once scored a goal in 5 seconds as a faceoff guy, and I don't know that you're noted for being a faceoff guy as much as you're noted for being just an unbelievable, midfielder. You've always said publicly that when you face off, you kind of go to the net. So first of all, what's your face-off techniques? Part of that is also you had 415 minutes in 2001 as a hockey player, so kind of a tough guy. Dave Schultz kind of an approach to this whole thing. So my question is, how'd you get into face-offs, and how do you score in 5 seconds, and what sort of walk through the mentality of what you do?
Well, facing off, I think I didn't really face off until I got to college. I was on the loose ball teams in Burnaby and was competitive in that regard. But for us, facing off was sort of correlated to that penalty minute, junior hockey penalty minute stat was that if you wanted to get on the field, you needed to be willing to do something that other guys weren't. So, we didn't have any guys who wanted to take face-offs in Denver. So it was myself and Scott Davidson. And it was a way for me to get on the field. It was a way for me to contribute. And it was a way for me to do something other guys didn't necessarily want to do. So, with respect to going to the rack, I think that was just, there was opportunities and face-offs all over the place, whether they're broken plays or, setups or, the way guys are defending. And for me, it was always just an advantage. And every time I was at the face-off dot, I was thinking, go to the net. And, that's probably a selfish component of mine that needed to be refined over a period of time, by different guys like Dave Huntley and coaches that wanted to, see me actually play. And so I think that really started to take a process in 2006 with Team Canada was, we needed the ball, we needed to possess the ball. And so, it was one of those things where there was opportunities, take them. And if there weren't, let's get the offense on the field and let's play lacrosse.
It's your hockey background and being that sort of a tough guy. And I want to kind of digress that you, having been sort of the penalty leader in Western Canada, I think there for a couple of years anyway.
I think so.
Was it the Broad Street bully influence, or was it just something that the way you played the game?
No, again, it was, it was something that I discovered, pretty young. I think it was, right around 16 years old that I was kind of good at it. So, it was a dynamic that opened up a lot of space for me as a player, opened up space for my teammates. And again, was something that, you could do that other guys didn't really want to. So there was a level of respect correlated to that. And it was a really positive thing that, had a bit of a negative spin. So, it was just something that, that I figured out I could do well that lent itself to helping our teams be successful.
Did the hockey background help when you started doing face-offs in college?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I faced off in hockey, but, very, very different. But I think it was just more of a competitive thing. If anything, it was having a little one-on-one battle, within a game that was kind of your own and something that you could, make something out of. And so if anything, it was more the compete level that lent itself to that than anything else.
Well, welcome back to another edition of Michigan Lacrosse Review. We're talking with Geoff Snider. And Geoff, I want to talk just briefly, talk a little bit about your academy in Calgary that started in 2007. And my name is Greg Norman, the host. And well, I want to start with that. You've got an academy, which is the logo behind me. Maybe talk a little bit about your academy.
Elevate Lacrosse started in 2007. We started with one camp here in Calgary, and I was obviously playing in Philadelphia at the time, and then it went great. The following year, we ran a camp again while I was playing pro, and I did really well. And then we tried to get an elite fall program sort of running at and it wasn't even a fall program at the time. It was just we were trying to get an academy started at a local program called the Edge School here in Calgary. That failed, and then we ended up taking on a fall program of our own with 19 kids in 2009, and it kind of went from there. Now, we're completely, fully vertically integrated. So from the first time you touch a lacrosse stick in, the Elevate Classroom Lacrosse program or Elevate Scoop, to playing in our Calgary Field Lacrosse program that they're a not-for-profit here in Calgary that we're contracted by, picking up a stick for the first time in a field lacrosse program, or you're participating in one of our camps, or you're off to college through our elite training program and our club program that runs in the fall. To the time that you're a professional lacrosse player. We've got tons of guys. A guy like Dan Taylor is the first guy that we sent to a Division I program. He plays here with the Calgary Roughnecks, and Dan is our classroom lacrosse director. So from the time that you touch a lacrosse stick to the time that you are playing professional lacrosse, you can be involved in an organization, and we take a lot of pride in that, and take a really firm stance on trying to actually grow the game. I think you hear that a lot. I think you hear, grow the game, grow the game, grow the game. And we talk about growing the game. So, it's what are you doing in your backyard to make sure that this sport continues to grow, and we get to continue to do something that we love and share that passion with kids around the community.
Usually don't do commercials, but you can see my Christmas box camp coming up behind you. So that's coming up, I'm assuming in December. Even with COVID, you're still doing camp?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting year for us. Calgary Field Lacrosse this summer had 280 kids participating right at the peak of what was going on there. He ran it completely physically distant. Obviously you can do that in a field lacrosse environment more so than a box lacrosse environment, but we've gained some experience. We've managed that through our summer with 280 kids. We had 120 this fall that was outside, and now we're transitioning into a winter season that's going to pose some new challenges. But we've got restrictions and caps, and again we're the coaches are all PPE'd up, and everything's sanitized. The facilities come in and sanitize after every session, and we're running things physically distant until we get another word. So, in terms of running lacrosse programming through a pandemic, we're definitely getting a what feels like a PhD right now. So, it's been positive, and it's just more important for the kids to continue to have an outlet. I think not having sport and being sequestered at home takes its toll on everybody mentally, parents included. So having an outlet for young people, I think, is really important. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that we're keeping our environment safe and healthy and running.
I think above the border, I think Canada's done a better job of controlling things than we have here in the U.S. So I think that's we live in Detroit, so we can't even get to Windsor, which is 4 miles. I can't even take the boat across Lake St. Clair because they're really clear about how you guys are dealing with it. So I think you guys have done a much better job of dealing with it than we have here.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a different, granted the population, it doesn't necessarily lend itself well in the US. There's exponentially more people than there are in Canada. I think we're 30 million total. So, for us, we're pretty spread out, but that being said, medicine and this sort of stuff in Canada is a little bit different than the US, but everybody's got their own, sort of take on this thing. And we're just trying to be a part of the solution rather than a part of the problem. And I think that's consistent, across the world right now, is everybody's trying to do what they think is best. And hopefully this thing runs its course sooner rather than later.
I want to talk a little bit about your academy, but I usually do these interviews. We kind of go back to the beginning. So I kind of want to go back to Calgary. And was it hockey first, or was it lacrosse first, or was it just the same index that, you played hockey in the winter and lacrosse in the summer?
Yeah, it was always hockey first. I picked up my first lacrosse stick at Captain John Palliser, which is an elementary school here in Calgary in the 5th grade. So, I think what's really cool about our classroom lacrosse program is we go back there every year and we provide a week-long residency for them. And we go in and we introduce the sport at the school where it was introduced to us. And so that's what's the beauty about this classroom lacrosse program that we're running is that's how we got introduced to the sport. My brother and I was in a classroom setting here in Calgary. So I was always a lacrosse player first. I was skating. I think it was 3 years old when I started skating. And so was playing hockey, and then went home one day and told Dad that, I picked up a lacrosse stick in a gym class and wanted to play lacrosse. And he was like, no, definitely not. And, he was in an arena all year long. And of course there wasn't field lacrosse here at the time. So he was in an arena all winter long. And then, he's got his kid coming home telling him he wants to be in an arena all summer long. And my dad wanted me to play some outside sports. So, had there been field lacrosse, he might have been a little bit more receptive to it, I think, at the time. And I was very persistent with him, and then it just became hockey, lacrosse. I never really played full time. When the hockey season was over, the lacrosse stick came out, and when the lacrosse season was over, it was back on skates. And that was done until my junior year at 21 years of age.
In the old days, and you have to fill the Windsor arenas. I played for the Spitfires in the OHA, and it was the only reason they had hockey in the summertime was just to make sure they could sell tickets, keep those little barns filled in a lot of cases. I mean, it was certainly a
Absolutely.
kind of sport. But was your dad a coach?
No. He played university hockey at the University of Alberta. He was in the Detroit Red Wings program for a little while until he had ended up breaking his arm and just kind of shut her down. But back then it obviously wasn't as a big deal as it is now. And he was my dad was never involved. I think that sort of there's remnants of that in our program now, is that everything that my brother and I did, it was on us. My dad never spoke to coaches. He never dealt with any of that stuff. And was, I think for us, was anything that we ever did in the sport was kind of on our own. So our programs are very, we don't have kids. We don't, everybody, and not to say that we don't care who the kids are. We don't care, where their background is, who they are, where they're from. This is about lacrosse. So I think that sort of leaks over into our side of things with respect to how we were brought up. Was, we just, if you're going to do anything in the sport, you got to do it on your own, and mom and dad are there to support you and not drive that direction.
Early on in your career, you won a Minto Cup. You were in Barnaby as well. So I asked you earlier, I said, I'm assuming that part of being in Barnaby was part of being involved with Matt Brown a little bit, who's the offensive coordinator, associate coach at Denver now.
Yeah, I went out there in 1998. So I was a little, I'm a couple years older than Matt. So I didn't know Matt at that point in time. In 1998, I went in and I was playing intermediate. So Matt would have been in midget or something like that, maybe first year midget at that point in time. So I didn't really get to know Matt at all. And then after that, I took a year off. We played intermediate, played up with the junior team, won a Minto Cup with Burnaby. I was, played sparingly, didn't play a ton, but was a part of that team. And then took a year off in 99. I was staying to train to play junior hockey here in Calgary. I wanted to make that team, so I stayed at home and trained and got fit and then ended up playing here junior with the Canucks. The following year, I went back, and then I went back the 3 subsequent years. We won in 2000, lost in 2001, and won in 2002. That was big, and Brownie was big parts of those teams, man. You never seen at his age, at 16 years of age, playing with 21-year-olds. He was he's a pretty spectacular lacrosse player. So that's where we got close. And then Brownie, it was funny, Brownie ended up going, I was older than him on the junior team, so I was more of an elder statesman, and he went to Denver prior to me. So he was a year ahead of me at Denver, and then I came in and I was a freshman under him. So it was a little ironic how that played out, but it was a great experience, and ultimately something that brought he and I a lot closer together.
In the early days, did you figure did it come in your brains that lacrosse was before hockey before lacrosse? Was there an epiphany at some point?
Yeah, I think I got drafted to the NLL my senior year, or my last year at junior. So I gotta think about that. How did that work? We were in St. Catharines in 2001, and I got drafted by the Vancouver Ravens. So pro hockey wasn't in the cards for me. Collegiate hockey was, however, and so I went back that year and I played. We ended up going. We were in the playoffs, and I remember I wrote Jamie Monroe an email at Denver, and he had never seen me play before, and I wanted to play hockey. So I wrote him an email and just said, "Hey, yeah, that's great. Like, you got a lacrosse program. Can I play hockey and lacrosse at Denver?" And at that point in time, Denver's like top 10 in the NCAA or top 5. I think they won 2 championships while I was at school. George, I went in and I met with Jamie. It was on it was the 26th of December. So Boxing Day here in Canada for all the Americans out there. I flew in, met with some of the guys, and met with George Gwozdecki, and they were like, "Listen, here's the situation with hockey." And I wasn't a scholarship hockey player by any means. I was, a 4th line third line puck blocking, grinder. I wouldn't have been a scholarship player for them. And hockey at that point in time was a tier 2 sport. Lacrosse was, hockey was tier 1, lacrosse was tier 2. So it's the same way that you can't have like a track athlete come in and then play football. And the track team absorbed scholarship. So Jamie offered me a deal, and I was supposed to go check out Brown on the back end of that, and applied a little pressure, and I ended up committing to Denver. We found out as we approached the spring that I needed to be enrolled prior to my 21st birthday, which was April of 2002.
NCAA rules, right?
Yeah. And that's since changed, which is a little different now. So I was 21 years old. I was turning 21. So I had to, I was playing in the playoffs in hockey at that point in time. And then, my best friend was we were both captains on the team. And I was like, hey, I'm going to have to leave. And I remember him being so pissed off at me because if we continued to move forward in the playoffs, I was going to be in a lot of trouble. I was going to have to leave the team. I don't want to say fortunately we lost. Obviously, we played our hearts out and fell short in a round. And then I ended up, packing up shop with a week to spare and heading into Denver to start my freshman year. And I redshirted that season. And then came out of that, went back to Burnaby, and we ended up winning our last Minto Cup. And that's when lacrosse, that was it for hockey. It was sort of the last time I laced up was at that period of time, and had a nice closure in my career, and then lacrosse became the focus very quickly.
Did you take a visit to Brown at all?
I did not. It's funny. I wouldn't change a thing. But being 39 years old now and washed up, an Ivy League education, might have been something I could have relied upon a little bit, but I wouldn't change a thing about if I could go back and do it again. I wouldn't take that visit. I don't think knowing what I know and don't regret a thing about it. Denver was the place for me. I'm certainly incredibly grateful. And if I could spend if I could spend one point at a time in my life for the rest of my life, it'd be in my junior year at Denver for sure. What
was it about Jamie that sold you on Denver?
Jamie's a great recruiter. I think Jamie, God, I've got to ask anybody. They'll tell you that I've got a big ego, and they'll tell me it's probably twice as big. So Jamie, made me feel great about going to school, and he was a big promoter of the game and super creative, and he was excellent at recruiting. He did a great job, and I went to Denver, and it's very similar to Calgary. It's a sister city, and felt a lot like home, and really got along with the guys. And then I had opportunity. I think that was one thing is I'm sure I put a lot of gray hairs on Jamie's head, and probably the hair that he's potentially losing at that point in time was a result of me as well. So, but I learned a ton, and it was fantastic.
He's the first guy that really went to Canada to get guys. I mean, he sort of opened up the pipeline to realize that you could get guys north of the border and come down and play. I think that's when you guys were in the Great Western, used to come here in Birmingham for your playoffs. So we got a chance to see those teams played, against Notre Dame and some of the original teams. In fact, you guys used to play at Birmingham Seaholm here in the Great Western playoffs. So we saw a different style, and the fun part was we could literally look out our window and see guys across the river. So we weren't that far from it, but in terms of style, we were miles from it. And I think Jamie did a good job. Was Jamie good for your game in the way he coached?
Yeah, I think Jamie was really hard on me, and I think that was and conversely, I was hard on him. So I think there was there was a duality there that. It was the first coach that I had that, it really, would I say that Jamie didn't like me? Probably, that's not the case, but I certainly was frustrating for him. And the one thing that he did was, he gave you the freedom to kind of play, your kind of game. I've never had a coach, want me to throw behind the backs. And I remember him telling me to throw around the world on a fast break once. And I was like, I don't think I can do that. So, he was very creative. He always wanted to push the envelope style wise. He was always, he's a really brilliant thinker when it comes to lacrosse. He's thinking about crazy stuff. He's thinking about, things that guys are never doing. And in the realm of creativity, the light bulb isn't, I'm certainly not going to compare him to Tesla or Edison or somebody like that, but you can't create new things if you don't think abstractly. And I think that's what Jamie really did. There's lots of things in my game that I pulled out of Jamie, and he gave me the opportunity to be a free thinker and play creatively. And I think that was something really new and unique for me, rather than, being very robotic. And so Jamie, has lots of crazy ideas, and the reality is that, some work and some don't, but the ones that do, really stuck with me. So he really, he helped me a ton. I really enjoyed my experience there, and it was challenging. It really pushed, the envelope for me as a person. But at the end of the day, I certainly look back and attribute, a lot of my growth as an individual and as a lacrosse player to that experience in that 4 years at Denver.
I think Jamie was the first one to, I'm not saying that coaches didn't use film, but I think he's one of the first that sort of to dissect it, sort of mad professor, starting to look at different schemes and different ideas. And I think that was something that we had a chance to interview Jamie for, I think, the 4th or 5th show. And I've known Jamie for a while. And I can't tell you how much I have respect for what he does. I think he still should be coaching, but he's done such a good job of amassing this educational package that he's got online. It's pretty impressive, and he continues to build to it. I think he's one of the great educators that we have at the moment for the sport. I think he does a great job doing that.
Yeah, the one thing that you can say about Jamie Monroe is that he's certainly creative, and in terms of what he did with 3D and the conception of that program to his transition into the online component and what he's doing now. You got to applaud him. Taking what was a growing thing in the lacrosse business and really being first to market in terms of its scalability. It's incredibly impressive, and he continues to, he's kind of like he's almost like Madonna. He keeps reinventing his image from an American field lacrosse player going to Brown to being one of really the first American players in the NLL. Transitioning out of that into being a head coach and being an assistant coach and then head coach, and then transitioning into a club, an entrepreneur essentially. His evolution has been really impressive, and certainly is on the front end of the curve in terms of what's going on in the United States right now and in athlete development.
You mentioned it. You were hard on Jamie. Explain what that is. Is it, are we hard-headed, or you had strong personality, or what would people say if you were interviewing folks about you? What would they say?
To bleep out a ton of stuff, I think, but does Zoom do that for you? Does it cut out the swear words?
Yeah.
No, I was really young. At 21, I think you would have expected me to be a little bit older in terms of a maturity perspective, but I wasn't. And went in there and being in box lacrosse and playing hockey. When you're frustrated, I never really played. My first real field lacrosse game, I played some fall ball. I remember playing Towson and stuff like that. We were out in St. Louis in a fall ball tournament. But my real first lacrosse game was against Duke at the Pioneer Classic in Denver. So I never played before. And, it's not like there's 30 seconds. It's not like there's boards. You got to control. Like my game, in 2000 and, I remember being in 14 and 18, 2014 playing pro, coming out of that and still feeling like I was learning and feeling like I was getting better as a player because of the education that I was getting. And, I started playing field lacrosse in 2002. So, 15 years later, I feel like I'm still evolving. And I think that really played a part with Jamie is, Jamie was really easy on me my freshman year. And then sophomore, junior, senior year, he was tough. And I needed that. And so I think, for me, I was a guy who couldn't go out and, I couldn't go out and grab another guy on the team and, punch his head in. You can't do that in field lacrosse when you're frustrated. So you got to figure out how to bottle it up. And for me, it was more decision making. And I think, in terms of my personality, I leaned a lot on coaches, and that was, something that Jamie adapted to as well. So, personality wise, I think I was definitely a struggle for him. I don't think he'd ever encountered a creature like me before. I certainly hadn't encountered one like him either. And I think we both locked horns a lot, and out of the end of that, came out of there with stronger horns collectively.
Surprisingly, he has nothing but the best to say about you, both as a college player and and a pro. And, the word that as we talk through this series is that, just what a gentleman you are. From 2006, you get drafted. Before we talk about Philadelphia, you get a chance to go from college right to the World Championships for Team Canada in London, Ontario. And you were the MVP of that event. And I talk a little bit about that experience.
More growth associated to me as a person, as a player, as a leader, as a teammate than 2006. I came out of Denver. I was an All-American. I was playing on the second midfield line, first midfield line, man up. Come out of that, go into the Outlaws. I'm running on a midfield line with Josh Sims and Geoff Sonke, and facing off and doing all these different things, and it's awesome. I'm having a great time. And then I go into Team Canada camp and I go out there and compete, and I'm facing off and I'm running midfield and I'm playing. And then we get into the World Championships and they're like, hey, you're just facing off. And I was kind of like, I hate the term FOGO. I think it's insane. And I think that's what's great about what's going on with college lacrosse right now is that, you can go out there and face off, but I think it's a real, we don't, up here, you'd think that we would just teach strictly face-offs, and we don't do that. We want well-rounded lacrosse players, and, you can't be a liability on the field. So, Dave Huntley came to me and he just said, listen, this is going to be your role. And I didn't understand the significance of the role, at that level. And I didn't, it was completely, I was completely deaf to what that looked like and why it was important in the international game. And so, Dave was great with me. Dave Huntley is a guy who, I'll remember forever. And is certainly, we lost him too soon in the lacrosse world. And you want to talk about, he was the first person to go down and play in the US for sure. Yeah. So he really led that charge. It was one of those things where, I remember I was rooming with Colin Doyle. Colin, a great guy, was again, everybody who I have lasting relationships with is always pretty hard on me. So, Colin was tough on me. I remember having a conversation with Taylor Ray, who's now the coach at St. Joe's. And he's like, listen, man, we can win this thing if you just focus on playing this role. And it's an important, and I was just kind of like, I sort of needed it to become my own. And it just sort of took off for me. I remember, Dave let me go and play against, I think we played against who was it? Finland. And let me play attack or something like that. Let me get it out of my system. I scored a bunch of goals and got it out of my system a little bit. And then, against the Iroquois, I'm facing off. Against the US, I'm facing off. And I really dug into that role just based on the investment of the people around me. And it was a super positive thing. And so that MVP, I was standing there, I'm like, I don't win anything like this. I remember not even paying attention. I wasn't really paying attention. I was kind of chatting. We were celebrating in line. And the time I really kind of woke up, there's a picture of Chris Seller kind of kissing me on the cheek. And I didn't really know what was going on. So it was a shock to me. And certainly the championship with Chris Anderson and Kyle Miller and Dave and guys that we don't have around anymore was paramount. But I certainly didn't expect that to be the outcome on a personal side.
Well, if you remember that week, it was 90 to 100 degrees that whole week. It was unbelievably hot at Western Ontario. You played the Canadians, the Americans, on Sunday night as an exhibition and lost by a goal. We had a chance to talk to Gary Gate about this. And as we're walking off the field, he's sitting in a big vat of ice. And my son, who's at the time 14, mentions that he asked him if he's too old to keep playing. We watched the entire week. We had sideline passes because we were part of the process. But I watched you play a second half against the Americans on the following Sunday. I don't think I've ever seen a player more dominant. And I don't think you ever heard the sidelines, but it's the best half of a lacrosse game I've ever watched anybody play. I know Gary had a lot of goals in that thing, but I got my hat on because that was probably one of the coolest weeks especially for a 14-year-old. And I'm just going to be a fan for a second. Walking off the field, you handed my son your gloves. And I just thought that was a cool thing, having won the championship. We still have the gloves displayed here at the house. And anybody comes over, it was fun to watch, and it was a great championship. And you certainly deserve the MVP. So enough of the commercial. I just, I thought that was pretty cool.
man, looking back on that, like I was so naive. Like I remember, a funny story. Dave, they sat down and they were conducting their interviews, their player interviews, and they were like, "Well, who do you think should be captain?" And like, I didn't know Gary. I didn't know Tom Marechek. I didn't know any of these guys. Like I was so green I was a hockey player playing lacrosse that I didn't really follow lacrosse, which I think is so rare just in lacrosse in general. Like I didn't follow pro lacrosse. I didn't do any of that. I didn't follow lacrosse at all growing up. I just played it. So I didn't, embarrassingly enough, like I kind of knew who Gary Gate was, but I didn't really know who Gary Gate was.
Right.
And so, we get through the interview and Dave's like, "Well, who do you think should be captains?" And I only really know like Taylor and Brody at the time. So I was like, well, Taylor and Brody. And then Gavin Prout was a roommate of mine. I was like, maybe Gavin. And then like, I remember Dave like looking at me, like literally like my hair was on fire and was just like, "You don't think Gary Gate and Tom Marechek should be the captains of Team Canada?" And I was like, "Well, I guess so. Like if that's who you think should be there." So and now Gary's a great friend and talked to Tom and but at that point in time, I genuinely didn't. I was so naive to what was going on around me. I think it kind of lent itself to like really not understanding the magnitude of the situation, which probably put me a little bit more at ease when I was out there playing.
The funny part of this show is the only person who has turned us down for interview is John Desko from Syracuse. And we've had, like I said, Bill Turney and Kevin Core. We had some really, some top flight guys. The greatest, when we get on the back of the sailboat and we drink a few beers, I get the chance to explain the story about John Desko. I'm not a Syracuse fan. Actually, I'm not a John Desko fan, but watching John Desko in the second half of that championship game, trying to figure out how to stop you, they had no clue. And it was fun watching guys, coaches are trying to always scheme and figure it out. And they just had no answer for you. And it was just fun watching that. And I can still in my brain go back watching this legendary coach trying to figure out how to stop this guy out of Denver. And it was a fun time. So again, enough of the commercial, but it was a good experience. Now you go from London, you end up in Philly. Now for a Calgary boy, Philly's a different town. Philly's a whole different town.
Definitely. Yeah. And yes and no, I think it's a different town, but I think I fit right in. The city of brotherly love. I don't know if people really understand what that means. But you'd understand what it means if you had a brother. So, I pick on mine pretty hard and the city does that, right? You got to have thick skin there. And whether you're getting in a cab or crossing the street or, whatever it is, you gotta have tough skin and you got to stand up for yourself. And that's respected in Philly. I can't say enough. It's my favorite U.S. city by far. A lot of people say, what's the greatest city in the world, and they'll say New York, and for obvious reasons. But I'll tell you what, Philadelphia is a place where I will be forever grateful for my opportunity in the National Lacrosse League with Russ Klein and Chris Fritz and Mike French out there. Those guys took great care of me, and obviously Hunts was the coach there with Chris Sanderson and it was Chris Anderson and Lindsay Sanderson when I first started. So. I'm very grateful for my start there, but that being said, I love that city. Man, I relish the opportunity to get back there every time I can. And I really feel at home there. It's a great part of the world, a beautiful part of the world. And yeah, for a Calgary boy coming out of Calgary and, nice apologetic Canada, I think I fit right in there.
Was it 2011 you get traded back to Calgary? Was that just worked out that way?
Was the owner here at the time prior to the Calgary Roughnecks now being owned by Calgary Sport and Entertainment Group, which is the Calgary Flames, the Stampeders, the Hitmen here in Calgary. And Brad was always kind of joking around about bringing me home. And I remember him calling me and he's like, "Hey, we traded for you." And I kind of started laughing. I was like, "Yeah, okay, Brad." He's like, No. Like, we traded for you." And I was like, "Oh, okay. All right. Well, here we go." So, that was the summer of 2010. And so I started planning on coming back and, it was perfect. Caleb Toth is a guy who I sort of followed out to Burnaby, who had an amazing career in the National Lacrosse League and won championships in Toronto and Calgary. And was a friend of mine. And, he always kind of said, always want to play for your hometown. And I felt very fortunate to come back here and ultimately be able to play here in Calgary. in front of, my family and friends, and this is my home. So it was important to me to be on the, the level that we were lacrosse wise, and then ultimately start digging in and giving back to the community here.
In the MLL, you had 3 years in Denver, a year in Toronto. And I guess my question is, talk a little bit about Denver, but what do you enjoy more, outdoor or indoor?
I obviously I like indoor a little bit more. I think it catered more to being involved. Like I played, as my career went on, I was more specialized, obviously, in field lacrosse, and I think that's where going to the net sort of stems from. Is that I always wanted to get involved in the play. Whereas as box lacrosse, I faced off, I ran transition, I played defense, I played on man down. I was more involved from a specific skill set than just sort of playing a specialized role in field lacrosse. So that being said, I really like the athleticism of field lacrosse. I like the game as a whole. I really playing in Denver, Toronto, Hamilton, Charlotte. It was awesome to kind of get around and see the United States. The guys are great. I had great experiences and really enjoyed playing at that level with the best in the world. So for me, I think box lacrosse was more of a game that I really took to and really loved just based on my involvement and getting a start in Denver, playing it at Invesco Field and Mile High now, and being out in those. We went to a championship in their inaugural year. It was pretty cool. So that experience was incredible as well. I'm super fortunate to have had the opportunity to step up there too.
With the outcoming of the PLL, I know there's a number of guys. I mean, Brody's still playing in San Diego. Did you ever give thought of playing PLL? Did Paul ever call?
They reached out. For me, I think Paul is a great guy. I think the hilarious part about Paul and I is that we've competed against each other so furiously in professional lacrosse, in the international game, and Paul's a great guy. I consider him a friend. I think that would surprise a lot of people based on our interactions, sort of publicly and competitively. But that being said, it's amazing what they've done. I'm certainly a big fan of the MLL. They were, it's a different product. It's a unique product, and you gotta tip your cap to Paul. I think he'd certainly be, I'm sure, very humble about what he's done. But at the same time, what an incredible thing to do and to get going and to really turn the corner as a professional athlete, now entrepreneur. So I'm in great shape. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret stepping out of the game when I did, because I wanted to finish my career in Calgary, and my time here was up, and I didn't want to go play anywhere else. I wanted to retire at home and stay in the community. I think that was very important for me. In terms of coming back and playing for Canada after rupturing my Achilles twice, I think that was more of just a middle finger to everybody that didn't think I could come back and do this. So that was a big thing for me as well, and important for me to put on the red and white for Dave Huntley and Chris and Kyle and guys that we'd lost in that Canadian program. And then, now just training and being in the gym and working out with the guys that I do there, there's always that little tickle in the back of your mind that it says, hey, you can go back and do this. But I'm not sure it's in the cards or not, but it'd be certainly interesting to try.
Is that inspirational chip that seems to be there and part of the conversation, has that been the motivator since the early days? I said the inspirational chip that you seem to keep on the shoulder. Is that what keeps you going?
I think it's coupled with a lot of things. I think I've done, in terms of leadership and reflecting and trying to mentor kids. There's a component of selfishness there, right? You want to play, you want to compete, you want to be involved. And so I think tapping into that mechanism is ultimately what kind of keeps you going, right? And then at the same time, it's the competitiveness. It's the people saying that it can't happen. I love competing. For me, even in a business world, when I find I'm at my worst is when I don't feel very competitive. I don't feel like there's a level of competition. When I'm at my best, and I think the biggest way to sort of articulate that is in games. If you're in a game where you're winning, 15-2, I won't have a point. And I in a game, and that's not necessarily a good thing. You obviously want to have killer instinct and play. Like, I'm still competing, but I think in games where it's 9-8, and you got 3-2, is a different sort of game for you. So that sort of competitive spirit, I think, for me is what sort of drags me along, and whether it's an inspirational chip or a selfish chip, or I'm just a mean prick and I want to prove everybody wrong. I think that's intrinsic, I think, regardless, and something that you can't manufacture.
Well, I can tell you, as a coach, I coach a club collegiate team. I'll take 25 of you. I coach that way, so I get the premise. I really do. I'd be remiss. What did you study at Denver academically?
I was a business. I got a business degree from the Daniels College of Business, so specialized in finance, marketing, and had a minor in economics.
Okay. I guess to wrap it up, one of the ones that you talked earlier about, sort of, you don't want to develop Fogos, you want to develop a complete player, which I think is a superb process in the approach to this whole thing. There's a lot of guys who've discovered box lacrosse in the United States who never played box. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on what is it you get from box, and maybe if we're making mistakes by not teaching the box ideals rather than trying to coaching field guys trying to get inside into a rink and not necessarily taking the advantages of that box provides.
First thing for us in terms of developing players, we're trying to develop good people. Lacrosse ends and sports end, and I think we use the term citizens a lot in our program. So it's a big part of our development. I think it's one thing to develop good players. It's another thing to develop good people, and so we're trying to do that in all sorts of ways, whether it's accountability or pressure or adversity and all of that stuff. So we try to incorporate that in everything that we do. Box lacrosse, I think there's a couple of aspects. One is the difference between, I think it's funny to compare box lacrosse and field lacrosse. Field lacrosse in the United States is primarily I would call it a white collar demographic, where lacrosse in Canada is probably the broadest socio-demographic population that you would see. You've got very, very, you've got underprivileged kids all the way to kids that are very fortunate and very well off playing the sport, and then everything in between. So the socio-demographic is very, very unique in Canada with the sport, and it's really interesting. We've had first Canadians, people that have immigrated to Canada, come out and participate in our program in a school, and now they're out playing lacrosse in the summer, which is really cool that someone would come in from another country and not play soccer or cricket or something that's more
right.
Local to them. They're coming in and picking up hockey or lacrosse, which are Canada's national sports. So you see a lot of really unique diversity in the game here. What you also see is you'll go into an arena and it'll be 80 degrees, 90 degrees in the middle of the summer, and all hell breaks loose, and you look up in the crowd and there's your mom fighting another mom. So not that that's a good thing, but the level of the sport here is super intense. It's really, really tough. It's not for the faint of heart, and I think that's where you see a bit of a dichotomy between the U.S. and Canada, is that lacrosse in the U.S. is very polite. Lacrosse in Canada is a little bit. It's more Bill Burr than it is President Obama or whoever would be a good.
Right. No, I get it.
So it's a little bit different. I think that's where you really see that unexplained sort of component between Canada and the U.S. Now, with respect to systems, I would say that the athleticism in Canada is getting better, where in the United States that would have been the real difference. You look at a guy like Schreiber or Paul or Tucker Durkin or any of these guys that are just freak athletes. That wasn't really seen in Canada. You take and God bless Dane's heart, you take Dane Doby and you stand him with his shirt off next to to Tucker Durkin, and you're like, okay, these guys play professional sports, but Dane is one of the slickest goal scorers in the world. So the difference, they're kind of blending, and I think that's the most important part out of all of this as we look to bring this game into the mainstream, is that the two have to come together. And so if you've got Americans taking the Jamie Monroe approach and having that light bulb go off in their head and think that they can do something different in the field game that is going to translate into the box lacrosse environment. I argue it all the time, and I say that the best players in the world are the players that play both disciplines and can thrive in both disciplines of the sport. So for that to be the case, for the masses and the bigger populations, the two sports need to merge, and they need to come together to create this hybrid that ultimately caters to the strengths and weaknesses of both sides of the border. And I think you see that happening now, more so than ever. And in terms of the Olympic rules, and you think about, people are all up in arms about different ideologies, but that's where the sport needs to go to continue to bring it, to another level. We need more Americans playing box lacrosse. We need more Canadians playing field lacrosse, and then eventually these need to sort of crash into each other to create, what we're looking to see now is the Olympic sport.
That was one of the questions I asked when I talked to Brody, was that his experience as a long pole was certainly benefited by being a short pole early as a box player. It just made it easier to pass, and it becomes a process. And I think when you're playing back and forth, the reason I asked the question is I just think there's a lot of guys here who hang out shingles that want to talk about being, box guys, and they're just not teaching box technique. And I think it's a little bit different. It's a smaller game. It's a variety of things. So that's the reason I asked the question. Last question. It's just a personal one. Who's the toughest defenseman you ever played against? Who gave you fits?
I didn't see a ton of time. I think, a guy who I really had a good time locking horns with was Eric Martin. Eric and I really had a fun relationship, and I'd consider him a friend today. And he was a guy who I really enjoyed competing against. Another guy was Geoff Molesky. I think Geoff, not only was he tough as nails, the guy could throw down, and man, he's just a phenomenal person. He's just a great guy. And who else? I really enjoyed competing against Brett Queener. I thought Brett, really brought out a competitive side of mine. As a goalie, you don't really get to interact with them very much, and Brett and I certainly found our way into each other's hearts. Man, aside from that, toughest defenders, that'd probably be it. I put Eric up there for sure on the field lacrosse side, and Geoff Molesky on the box lacrosse side for sure.
And I guess I had one more personal question. What did Randy Huntley mean to Canadian lacrosse? I think he was the glue for a lot of years that kept that program together.
Dave he was a guy who really saw things a little bit differently. He had a ton of crazy ideas. He had a ton of, he was a free thinker like Jamie as well. And I know Jamie and him got along really well. And what Dave was a guy who, if you were in with Dave, you knew. And if you were out with Dave, you knew. And if you were out with Dave, it was likely for a good reason. He was a guy that had collected, a peer group and people around him that was very unique. He really saw, the character and the best side of people. And I think that he really tried to propagate that in his message to kids coming up in Canada and for kids playing the game. I think, him and Frank Nielsen and Dave Huntley in 2006 really brought that team to where it was. In terms of where it went from there, I think Dave was really the architect of the Canadian team culture, and it's transitioned through. I can only speak for the men's side because that's where I'm involved. But that culture has leaked down in all facets of the men's program, and it's now our duty to ensure that remains. So, it's been a real positive, it was really positive from 2006 to 2018 for me, and continues to be. And we're looking to, in terms of how important Dave was to that program and being the glue of it, that there's remnants of that, and there will continue to be as long as this program is a part of the guys that we're involved. We'll continue to make sure that we push that agenda.
I should point out that Randy Huntley's a relief pitcher for the Atlanta Braves. Dave Huntley was a former Canadian hockey guy. I get it mixed up. Last thing, what's next for you?
Next for me, we're going to continue to grow this sport here in Calgary. I think we're pretty nimble with respect to what we're doing out here, so we're trying to coach the game and introduce it as much as possible. We're really trying to get more women playing the game here in Canada. It's sparse with respect to the female contribution to the sport. Not their own contribution, but the people that are participating in the game. And I think, trying to get more kids off to college. We take a lot of pride in having the ability to really push that agenda to get kids to school. I'm super proud of the 117 kids that we've sent to date out of this program, and we're looking to continue to contribute to the higher education of kids here in the community and getting them back here, working with more lacrosse players playing the game and contributing more to the environment. So, that's a big focus of ours coming up next. We're going to look to try and, potentially branch out and do some other things here in the community that is correlated with Elevate and its ideology here in Calgary.
Well, Geoff, I really appreciate your time. Like I said, you're a class act, and I again, talking to you has been a real pleasure. And be safe the rest of the winter, and I hope things work out well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. If there's anything I can do for you in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know.